Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. 45 years ago this month marks the anniversary of the notorious Attica prison uprising. Back in 1971, thousands of inmates in a New York State correctional facility demanded better conditions and better treatment. Malika has more on that story.
You're right, Femi. On the anniversary of the uprising earlier this month, prisoners nationwide went on strike calling for some of the same things. Inmates refused to report to work, protesting for better wages and working conditions. So more than 4 decades on, what's changed? Today we'll hear from former inmates about prison labor and the strikes.
For quality assurance purposes, your call will be monitored and recorded. Your call will be handled by a federal inmate. For all other calls, please hold the line.
Now, what you just heard was a call centre staffed by prisoners. All inmates are required to work if they are medically able in the United States, and jobs range from kitchen and custodial duties to programmes that provide more skills training. Prisoners who've gone on strike this month say there needs to be more protection and compensation for the work that they do. And according to the Federal Bureau of Prisons, some inmates make as little as 12 cents an hour.
Strikers and activists call this modern-day slavery, but correction officials have a different perspective. They say these programs are geared toward rehabilitation, preparing those incarcerated with skills they'll need once they're released. Well, to help us talk about this, we're joined by Chris Gouts, a public information officer for the Michigan Department of Corrections. In Los Angeles, California, Philip Ruiz, a former prisoner, he's now a spokesman for the Incarcerated Workers Organizing Committee, one of the main groups leading the strike.
Carrie Richmond is an assistant professor of criminal justice and criminology at Lycoming College in the U.S. state of Pennsylvania, and at the Holman Correctional Facility in the United States state of Alabama, we have Kinetic Justice. He's an inmate currently serving time in solitary confinement. He's also the co-founder of the Free Alabama movement, one of the groups involved in the strike. Now, we also invited the U.S. Federal Bureau of Prisons to join us today, but they declined to be part of this program, and they also refused to give us a statement. Guess it's good to have you here in our conversation. Malika, where do we want to start? Where are you going to start?
I'll start with a video we got from the stream. Our stream community was pretty excited we're doing the show because it's something they want to talk about. Okay. So this is a video from Maya Shinwar, a journalist in Chicago who's written a book about why prison doesn't work. Have a listen.
The organizers of the current prison strike say in their public statement, they cannot run these facilities without us. So it's not that the outside economy can't run without prison labor, it's that prisons can't run without prison labor. This is something that the scholar Bruce Wilson Gilmore emphasizes. So through this strike, people are refusing to be exploited to reproduce the system that oppresses them.
So Kinetic, she calls it exploitation. Is that how you see it? Is that why you're striking?
It is hyper-exploitation. And I want to clarify that it is not slave-like conditions in prison labor. This is actually the institution of slavery. And people get offended by that term because they confuse the customs and practices that were used to maintain slavery with the actual institution of slavery. Slavery was an economic system then, and it's an economic system now. When the 13th Amendment allegedly abolished slavery, it created this institution of the criminal justice system. And with that, this became slavery by another name. And you can call it whatever you like, but it is slavery. And the patterns and practices and customs that are used to maintain it are varying, but they are the same. This is the same institution of slavery, and slavery was always about exploiting the labor of a lower class people in this country.
Chris, are inmates in Michigan, are they striking? Have you seen any strike action?
And we had one facility out of 31 in Michigan that had a work stoppage on September 9th, and since then we haven't had any other incidents related to the September 9th issue.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it stems from, we have a very strong and open line of communication with our prison population. They have the ability to talk to the wardens, the deputy wardens, the line staff on a daily basis and bring up these type of issues. So we feel like that's why we didn't see a lot of the issues that you saw in some other states. So by and large, we didn't have the kind of issues that I think the prison workers that were the strike folks that were really pushing this around the country expected to see, at least in Michigan. And I think that stems from the job we do, and that our operation isn't like other states. And I can only speak for Michigan. I know that there are other states that operate things like you mentioned, like call centers, that would benefit a private corporation. We don't do that in Michigan. The only work that's done by Michigan prisoners are to benefit the prison population. Working in the kitchen, making the outfits that the prisoners wear, things like that.
Philip, any issues with the way that the prisoners are treated in Michigan? Is that an issue?
It's kind of funny how it was expressed right now that Michigan prisoners have direct contact with wardens. When I was in California prisons, the wardens rarely came onto the prison grounds, and attempting to talk to a prison warden was like getting a handshake from the president. So I find that kind of funny that prisons in Michigan are like that, and kind of unbelievable, to be honest.
I'm trying to work out how you strike in prison. Philip, can you explain that?
Say one more time, please.
How do you strike when you're in prison?
So I just got out of prison 2 years ago. I served 10 years for a nonviolent drug offense. 8.5 of those years was in solitary confinement for protesting and participating in strikes while I was incarcerated. And you could do various things inside prison. You could refuse to work. You could do a slowdown. You could do a walkout. You could do there's so many tactics prisoners have available to them to strike and to basically shut down the prisons, because the prisoners are the ones who make prisons function. They do support services, clerical, maintenance, kitchen jobs, you name it, the prisoners do it. And as far as rehabilitation, I've been out of prison since July of 2014. I have yet to obtain a job. So all these skills I gained, quote unquote skills, while in prison hasn't done me any benefit. And believe me, I've been trying on a daily basis to obtain employment.
The skills, I know, is something that our community does want to talk about, but before we get there, I want to show this. This is one of the flyers that's been floating around on social media. This is a prison report hotline. This is from the Free Alabama movement, and Kinetic, I'll address this to you. So on the flyer, it says to report abuse, police brutality, and corruption by the Alabama Department of Corrections. You can call this number. You can leave a detailed message. You can also send any documentation, it says, to an email address. How easy or difficult is it to get information out of the prison? And of course, you are talking to us right now from solitary, right?
Yes, I am. And we put that flyer out because there is really no true grievance system in the Alabama prison system. They have no grievance system. Therefore, we had to create an avenue for people to report issues of abuse so we could create a database because 2014, the Department of Justice released a report that showed and proved that for 20 years, that officers had been sexually abusing the women under their care and custody and control at Tutwiler Prison here in Alabama. At the same time, there were several instances where officers were assaulting inmates and they were caught on camera, and these things were being exposed on a daily basis. However, with the advent of the prison system in Alabama now, it's a lot easier for us to get information out to the people in society. People in Alabama are in an uproar about the injustice going on in this state, and there are a lot of people who are willing to aid and assist. Therefore, we created this hotline to create a database that we can be able to add to the lawsuits that are going on, as the Equal Justice Initiative with Brian Stevenson has a class action lawsuit now against the Department of Corrections for the level of violence and the poor leadership. The Southern Poverty Law Center had a class action lawsuit about the lack of medical treatment, as Horizon and the Department of Corrections has conspired to deny people medical treatment until they're in the last stages of these terminal diseases. So we needed to create this hotline to give people access to someone outside that will be there for them, as our outside sister organization, Mothers and Families, is that support system for these men and women that are incarcerated in the state of Alabama.
So as you can hear, there are a lot of different issues from the different strikes around the United States. The one thing that unifies all of the strikers, though, is something I want to show you here on my laptop. And this references when slavery was abolished in 1865. And Carrie, I want you to come in on this one. Here's the reference here for the 13th Amendment. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted shall exist within the United States. So no slavery in the United States except if you're a prisoner. Can you give us that context for why then prisoners or inmates would now feel that they are being forced to work or made to work for just a couple of cents a day?
Well, I think in terms of the connection, I mean, and not so much specific to the 13th Amendment, but I mean, there's always been a connection between work and punishment. And I think historically, if you think about the development of the penitentiary system in this country, work has always been a part of punishment in terms of instilling discipline and providing people with skills that will enable them to be successful upon release. But I think going back to the points made earlier, I mean, I think that overall the general public is just really uninformed about what's going on in our prisons today. And so I think that part of the reform that's needed is from the general public to really be pushing for kind of understanding the conditions, and it's really up to them as voters to really be advocating for changes. And I think that some of the problems that we're seeing today is because there are such high numbers of people who are incarcerated that we're not able to provide people with the types of programming necessary to help them be successful upon release.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the general public maybe just not knowing about this. This is a tweet we got from Meha. She says, unfortunately, the general public doesn't concern itself too much with the plight of prisoners because they're afraid it will look sympathetic to criminals. So out of our community that had heard about this issue, we got these two responses. This is Greg, who says, if you're forced to work and punished if you refuse, you are enslaved, period. So he sees this as slavery. On the other hand, Sharifa says, I don't think it is modern day slavery. Free labor gives the detainee something to do and a responsibility. And to be honest, if a rapist has to clean the toilets, that's not a fair punishment. They should get worse. Chris, take us through this argument that prison work is giving people in prison something to do.
Well, it does do that. It does give them something to do. I would push back a little bit on the way that Twitter user characterized that. Prisoners, at the end of the day, are still human, just like you and I, and we wouldn't consider punishing them in that way and cleaning toilets and that sort of thing based on their crime. That's just not something that a humane Department of Corrections would endeavor. But these do provide them with job skills, whether it's a very technical job. We have the women at our female prison that make all of the dentures and all the dental appliances for all the prisoners across the country. When those women are paroled, many of them have started their own companies because it's such a very technical skill to be able to do. And then they go out and then they hire parolees who come out of that program. It's been very successful. But we also have jobs that need to be done, such as, sweeping the floors and things like that. Those are very entry-level positions. And so oftentimes prisoners that come to us have never had a job before. They were arrested very early, or they had just, for whatever reason, had never been employed, never got that first job at McDonald's or some fast food joint. And so they don't have the soft skills.
So how many former prisoners in Michigan actually have employment right now? Is there statistics on former Michigan prisoners, like you say, who have job skills of cleaning toilets while in prisons? How many are employed currently?
The tough part of it is, and which is totally understandable, is that once the prisoners leave our system and become parolees, and once they're off parole, they don't tend to stay in touch with us. They don't tend to write letters and keep up with us and tell us how they're doing. So that's one problem in keeping sort of the metrics. We've been trying to collect that data.
Maybe former prisoners could use the Department of Corrections as references. Maybe you think that would help?
Philip, do you know who I believe who might know about how helpful prison jobs might be, and that's Kerry. Kerry, you did a whole study about prison industry. Can you help Philip with how does this help with getting work on the outside?
Right, and actually I agree with both Chris and Philip. The idea being that individuals who are incarcerated need skills that are going to help them maintain employment upon release. And so something like working in a kitchen, something like cleaning floors, right, we all know that's not going to provide sustainable employment upon release. And so my research that I did in Pennsylvania, what I actually found was that when you provide individuals with skilled employment opportunities, there's a great program in Pennsylvania where individuals learn how to make and repair prescription eyeglasses. And that really provides individuals with the skills and training needing to obtain employment, excuse me. And the benefit of something like that is that there's a eyeglass center in every big box store across the country. And so when you talk about things like making uniforms and kind of sewing factories, things like that, those are incredibly rare now. But we want to be able to provide individuals with skills. And to sort of piggyback on Philip's comment, what came out of the interviews that I did with inmates incarcerated in Pennsylvania was exactly that, was the idea that they had this great employment experience that then nobody could, they couldn't use anybody as a reference because they're not able to have contact with anybody incarcerated anymore. And so, some of these individuals had worked in these factories for years. And they could write it on their resume, but then they couldn't use their supervisor as a reference. And that's really problematic because these are individuals who don't have people in their lives who can speak up for them. They've lost contact with a lot of former employers. And so, this supervisor that they've had is incredibly valuable in sort of speaking to them about them as an employee. And so, there's some kind of, when I speak about reform, these are the kinds of changes that need to be made to make these programs more effective.
Right. Carrie, I think that you just answered the question that Maria had. So I'm going to pass it over to Philip, because Maria says, wouldn't former inmates benefit from being able to define themselves by job title rather than, quote unquote, ex-con? It might curb recidivism. So Philip, do you not see it this way?
No, I actually, as far as vocations and programs, I was actually part of a vocation. I got certified as an electrician while I was incarcerated before I got put into solitary confinement. And come to find out, when I was released, I try to use that as part of my resume that I'm a certified electrician. And come to find out, the school that had a contract with CDC, California Prison System, wasn't accredited in California. So I'm only a certified electrician in the state where this school exists, which is Florida. So yeah, I try to get a job out here as an electrician, and come to find out, I'm not certified out here. So good looking out, California prisons.
Kinetic, you describe prison work as slavery. Unpack that a little bit more.
I think a big difference is in region. In the South, it's a lot more pronounced. And what I mean by that is that we still have people that are going out in the fields, that are picking peas, that are picking vegetables. We have people that are raising catfish and catfish ponds. So we have ranches where they're raising cattle. And, these are things that people are actually seeing, that people are actually still on horses overseeing people picking peas and so forth in the fields. And so forth. So, we're actually seeing those things that are present on the outside, but on the inside, the type of things that are going on is a lot of people are being warehoused in these large dormitories and prisons, and they're having these factory jobs brought in. At this camp I'm at now, they produce every license plate tag in the state, and that is the job that people are given here, to produce every tag in the state for these cars, SUVs, and et cetera. And that skill right there does not translate for a lot of them when they get out of here, as the people who work those jobs are the people that are targeted as, people with life without parole, people who don't have no outside help, and they're forced to accept being paid 17 cents an hour at these jobs where they're producing millions of tags, millions of dollars worth of tags. The last count that I had, they produced 20,000 tags a day, and that's 100,000 tags a week. And they can take 10 of those tags and pay all of their workers for a month. And that's ridiculous. And that is evident
and
of
to
what
be
we're
the
saying
devil's
of
advocate here,
exploitation and slavery still exists and alive and well in the state of Alabama.
and I would completely agree with his argument, but just to play devil's advocate here, I mean, part of prison labor and prison industry is to offset the cost of incarceration for the Department of Corrections. And so we're actually seeing in Pennsylvania, we're a big agricultural state. And so we're seeing that the Department of Corrections is starting programs like that. They had them in the state and then got rid of them, and now they're trying to begin them again. But things like, meat packing industries, farming, growing different types of fruits. And the benefit of that, is to offset the cost of incarceration for the state. And, I mean, again, we have really very large numbers of people who are incarcerated that's costing the taxpayers, a significant amount of money. And so it really comes back to this notion of educating the general public about this. I mean, people want bad individuals to be incarcerated. And so the state has to figure out ways to pay for this. And so, while it can be couched as modern day slavery, I think the purpose of it needs to be understood, in that if they can make those things, that can then lower the cost of incarceration.
One thing people forget to keep in mind is that a lot of these jobs prisoners are doing are jobs that could be outside that people in society are doing. Back in the 80s, a lot of the big thing was jobs are being outsourced. Well, now jobs are being insourced to prison slave labor, and I think society needs to take a better look at that, because all these jobs are jobs prison or citizens out here could be doing, and they're not, because they're being insourced into prison slave labor.
When we talk about those jobs, actually, Chris, I want to go to you with this, because Kinetic, hold on just 1 second, because there's a question here.
Every tag, Kinetic tag in the state, what would they have to pay an employee? When you're talking about here, you don't have no benefits, no insurance, no nothing, and you only get paid 17 to 30 cents an hour. And these are jobs in society they would have to pay probably $15 to $20 an hour with benefits, etc.
So Kinetic, then there's a question here. You raised that. And Kinetic, that raises then a question people have online, and this just came in. This is Colin. He says, so then what happens when people refuse to work? He's specifically addressing this to those incarcerated in Michigan. So I'll give this to you, Chris. He says prisoners in Michigan are not punished for refusing work. What happens when someone says, I'm not going to?
Well, in Michigan, you're not forced to work when you come into prison. You're basically sent down one of two tracks. You can choose to go to school, or you can choose to work. And so those that work, right now, Michigan is one of the biggest recipients of Pell Grants. And so we have a lot of students enrolled in college and taking college courses. And another large group are taking their GED courses and getting their high school equivalent. And then others are doing vocational trades. Those that
I think you're avoiding the question, refusal to work. What happens to a prisoner who refuses to work? In California prisons, if a prisoner refuses to work, then you get fired, of course, and you get written up. You get written up, which is a disciplinary action, and when you get written up, they add time to your sentence, so you won't go home when you're supposed to go home. That's what happens to you when you refuse to work.
Sure. In Michigan, that wouldn't happen. We don't have the ability to add time to anybody's sentence for something that they would do institutionally. What would happen in the case where somebody refused to work, or if they got fired? They may not have the opportunity to add time, but disciplinaries do affect their ability to make parole and could extend their sentences because they had a disciplinary for refusing to work. Because that's exactly what happens. You refuse to work, you either written a disciplinary or you are physically assaulted and placed in segregation.
Kinetic, the reason why you're in solitary confinement, can you explain that to our audience? We're almost at the end of this part of the show. Why are you in solitary right now, Kinetic?
Excuse me, repeat that.
Why are you in solitary confinement right now?
I'm in solitary confinement. This is my 34th month for organizing a nonviolent peaceful protest to expose the inhumanities and the injustices inflicted upon the 30,000 people incarcerated in the state of Alabama. I was labeled a threat to the security of all institutions in the state of Alabama for educating and organizing people around the issues that affect us.
All right. I know it's not easy to get a phone into solitary confinement. We appreciate you talking to us today. In fact, you're not allowed to have a phone in solitary confinement, just in case the audience around the world is watching this going, wow, he's got a mobile phone. That is not normal. I will not go into more details about that. Philip, you went on strike when you were in prison. You went on strike, and then what happened? Do strikes work?
So, strikes in prison were very effective. At one point in time, I worked in a facility's lunchroom, which central kitchen is called, and what we did was we prepared the lunches for the entire prison, which was maybe 1,500 prisoners.
Philip, I'm going to hurry you because I've got 30 seconds left to the end of this show, and you had no breaks. You had no lunch breaks, no food breaks. So you went on strike.
That's correct.
And then what happened?
We did a wildcat strike. We walked out, and we all got put in solitary confinement. And then the next batch of prisoners who got hired had lunch breaks, and they had another break in between that.
All right.
So it was effective.
You lost your job, but you made it better for people who came after you. Chris, Philip, Kerry, Kinetic Justice, we're taking you all to our post show. It's our online post show, stream.outerzero.com. Keep following our conversation with hashtag AJStream. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care. Hello again, I'm Femi OK with Malika Blau in our online post show. We're talking about the strikes around US prisons right now. Malika, you have a point that you wanted to start this part of the conversation off with.
Because a couple of people made this point online, and it's about these institutions that are publicly funded, but then lack transparency, some say, to those people who are funding it, which are the taxpayers. This is a video comment we got from Alice Sperry. She's a journalist at The Intercept. Have a listen.
I think one of the most notable things about them is just how difficult it is for the public to really know what's going on inside prisons. Corrections Department tightly control all the information that comes out, which is in part why 3 weeks later we still know so little about the current strike, where it has happened, and how many people it has involved. What we do know is that in a number of prisons there has been retaliation against leaders of the strike. Some have been moved to other facilities, and many have been placed on solitary confinement and have been denied communication privileges. In some cases, retaliation has been a lot harsher than that. All of this makes it imperative on those of us that are outside to really push with prison officials for better information.
So, Chris, you're a public information officer, and of course you're appearing on this show to give us information. But what do you have to say to her point about it being so difficult, and why do you think that is the case for other correctional facilities?
Well, I think in general, corrections departments have been very close-knit, and they don't tend to let information out. Is oftentimes what you see in the news about corrections, about prisons, is bad, and so coming into this role as a former journalist, I've been trying to be more outward and try to bring more reporters in. We've had a lot of coverage of Michigan prisons, but it's still very difficult to get over that mindset over a long period of years. But to her point about what's going on and moving prisoners around, that does happen, and that did happen in our case. The prisoners that were organizing the protest, they were moved to other prisons. They were moved up a security level. They're not in solitary. They were placed in segregation for a brief time, but now they're into a higher security level at another prison. And a lot of times that was because a lot of the prisoners prior to September 9th reached out to us, sent letters to the warden, talked to the warden, and said, I want to come to work, but the gangs that are organizing this said that threaten me with violence if I don't show up. And so those are the kind of people that we removed, so that those who wanted to continue to work, because especially in the kitchen where this strike happened, those are pretty much the highest paid jobs in the facilities, and they didn't want to lose those jobs. And so we moved those out that were threatening them, and so that they could continue their work.
So it sounds like everybody's really happy in the Michigan prison facilities.
Well, I wouldn't say that.
All right.
I wouldn't say that. They don't want to be there.
Right, they don't want to be there, but they're happy with the work they're doing. Is that what you're saying?
No. Well, there are certainly some prisoners that are happy to have a job, especially
when I worked in a central kitchen in prison. It was a top-notch job, and everybody was wanting a job like that. And coming from poor backgrounds, those jobs, as little as they pay, sometimes I don't know what prisons pay 9 cents an hour, but I know prisons in California pay 9 cents a day. I had a job that paid somewhat around there, and these jobs were top-notch jobs. But yet, everybody that comes from these poor backgrounds needs that extra little cash to buy the necessities that prisons sell. But at the same time, this strike that I participated in, everybody was so willing to walk out to strike. So they knew they were going to lose what we call in prisons pay numbers, the money that we get for working, and all the privileges that go along with that, the visitation, the phone calls, the rec time, all that gets taken away when you refuse to work, when you go on strike. But all these prisoners, myself included, we were willing to take that risk to walk out, to bring to attention what's going on how we're being exploited inside the lunchroom. And it started over us not being able to get little snacks during we were working, because we worked from 6:30 in the morning to 4:30, and the guards told us you could eat your lunch and you could get your snack when you go back to your prison cell. Really? What happened to the breaks? We want to eat something, and that little issue caused caused the prisoners to strike. And that little issue brought an enlightenment to so many prisoners that were not even aware of what a strike is or the conditions, because they're so used to being exploited. It inspired a lot of prisoners who weren't socially conscious to spread that word to other prisoners. Although we got isolated, every prisoner was eventually transferred to different prisons, and then they spread the word of what's possible and what can happen through direct action through prisoners. That's why supporting strikes and getting out there and bringing attention to the working conditions in prison is so important.
And Philip, you know, I think it's stories like that, which is why we're seeing tweets like this. This is someone who says, discussing whether prison labor is justified assumes the caging of human beings and brutal policing is justified. So Carrie, if you could even begin to address some of the demands that prisoners have, where would you start in starting this reform?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing is this real sort of distinction that we make in society about good people versus bad people.
All right, so we're not hearing all of Kerry. I hear that she feels that there's reform necessary. Kinetic, we're just going to wrap up this part of the show. You have been in solitary for organising strikes for more than 2 years. Is it worth it? Do we still have kinetic justice? Do we have him? I think it was pretty much it was a miracle that we had him in the first place. Malika, we're going to wrap up now. Where do you want to leave us?
You know, it's pretty one-sided on our online from our community, because this is an issue they feel pretty strongly about. So I'll share 2 tweets of the same perspective. This is Radis, who says, from Barcelona, McDonald's spray painted in solidarity with the U.S. You see there, solidarity with USA prisoners on strike. And this from Matt, who says, mad support for Brother Philip and the brave striking prisoners across the U.S. and the world.
Chris and Philip and Kerry and Kinetic Justice, thank you for being part of this conversation. It's not been held around the US very often and not been held around the world at all. So it's been good to have you on the stream today. Thanks for your time, everybody. Appreciate it. Take care.